Okay, it's 10 o'clock. I think we should get going. Why don't you go right ahead, Judith?
Good morning and welcome to New Jersey Peace Action's presentation in observance of the 75th anniversary of the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. My name is Judith Arnold. I'm president of New Jersey Peace Action, and I am extremely proud to introduce to you all my grandchild, Ryan. Today, Ryan will be reading Sadako and the Thousand Paper Cranes by Eleanor Kaur. It's a story about a young girl who was living in Hiroshima 75 years ago on August 6, 1945, when the US dropped an atomic bomb on her city. Ryan and I read this book together when they were growing up, and we went together to see a theater production at Centenary College in Hackettstown, New Jersey. After the reading, Ryan will demonstrate how to fold a paper crane, and we will provide a list of sources if you wish to learn more about origami. Ryan?
Alrighty. All right, so Sadako and the Thousand Paper Cranes by Eleanor Kaur. Chapter 1, Good Luck Signs. Sadako was born to be a runner. Her mother always said Sadako had learned to run before she could walk. One morning in August 1954, Sadako ran outside into the street as soon as she was dressed. The morning sun of Japan touched brown highlights in her dark hair. There was not a speck of cloud in the blue sky. It was a good sign. Sadako was always on the lookout for good luck signs. Back in the house, her sister and two brothers were still sleeping in their bed quilts. She poked her big brother, Masahiro. "Get up, lazy bones," she said. "It's peace day." Masahiro groaned and yawned. He wanted to sleep as long as possible, but like most 14-year-old boys, he also loved to eat. When he sniffed the good smell of bean soup, Masahiro got up. Soon, Mitsui and Iji were awake too. Sadako helped Iji get dressed. He was 6, but sometimes lost a sock or shirt. Afterward, Sadako folded the bed quilts. Her sister, Mitsui, who was 9, helped put them away in the closet. Rushing like a whirlwind into the kitchen, Sadako cried, "Oh, Mother, I can hardly wait to go to the carnival. Can we please hurry with breakfast?" Her mother was busily slicing pickled radishes to serve with the rice and soup. She looked sternly at Sadako. "You are 11 years old and should know better," she scolded. "You must not call it a carnival. Every year on August 6th, we remember those who died when the atom bomb was dropped on our city. It is the Memorial Day." Mr. Sasaki came in from the back porch. "That's right," he said. "Sadako-chan, you must show respect. Your own grandmother was killed that awful day." "But I do respect Oba-chan," Sadako said. "I pray for her spirit every morning. It's just that I'm so happy today." "As a matter of fact, it's time for our prayers now," her father said. The Sasaki family gathered around the little altar shelf. Oba-chan's picture was there in a gold frame. Sadako looked at the ceiling and wondered if her grandmother's spirit was floating somewhere above the altar. "Sadako-chan," Mr. Sasaki said sharply. Sadako quickly bowed her head. She fidgeted and wriggled her bare toes while Mr. Sasaki spoke. He prayed that the spirits of their ancestors were happy and peaceful. He gave thanks for his barbershop. He gave thanks for his fine children. And he prayed that his family would be protected from the atom bomb disease called leukemia. Many still died from the disease, even though the atom bomb had been dropped on Hiroshima 9 years before. It had filled the air with radiation, a kind of poison, that stayed inside people for a long time. At breakfast, Sadako noisily gulped down her soup and rice. Masahiro began to talk about girls who ate like hungry dragons, but Sadako didn't hear his teasing. Her thoughts were dancing around the peace day of last year. She loved the crowds of people, the music, and fireworks. Sadako could still taste the spun cotton candy. She finished breakfast before anyone else. When she jumped up, Sadako almost knocked the table over. She was tall for her age, and her long legs always seemed to get in the way. "Come on, Mitsui-chan," she said. "Let's wash the dishes so that we can go soon." When the kitchen was clean and tidy, Sadako tied red bows on her braids and stood impatiently by the door. "Sadako-chan," her mother said softly, "we aren't leaving until 7:30. You can sit quietly until it's time to go." Sadako plopped down with a thud onto the tatami mat. Nothing ever made her parents hurry. While she sat there, a fuzzy spider paced across the room. A spider was a good luck sign. Now Sadako was sure the day would be wonderful. She cupped the insect in her hands and carefully set it free outside. That's silly, Masahiro said. Spiders don't really bring good luck. Just wait and see, Sadako said gaily. Chapter 2, Peace Day. When the family started out, the air was already warm and dust hung over the busy streets. Sadako ran ahead to the house of her best friend, Chizuko. The two had been friends since kindergarten. Sadako was sure that they would always be as close as two pine needles on the same twig. Chizuko waved and walked to her. Sadako sighed. Sometimes she wished that her friend would move a little bit faster. Don't be such a turtle, she shouted. Let's hurry so we won't miss anything. Sadako-chan, go slowly in this heat, her mother called after her. Sasaki frowned. Sadako is always in such a hurry to be first that she never stops to listen, she said. Mr. Sasaki laughed and said, well, did you ever see her walk when she could run, hop, or jump? There was pride in his voice because Sadako was such a fast, strong runner. At the entrance to the Peace Park, people filed through the memorial building in silence. On the walls were photographs of the dead and dying in a ruined city. The atom bomb, the thunderbolt, had turned Hiroshima into a desert. Sadako didn't want to look at the frightening pictures. She held tight to Chizuko's hand and walked quickly through the building. I remember the thunderbolt, Sadako whispered to her friend. There was a flash of a million suns, then the heat prickled my eyes like needles. How can you possibly remember anything, Chizuko explained. You were only a baby then. Well, I do, Sadako said stubbornly. After speeches by Buddhist priests and the mayor, hundreds of white doves were freed from their cages. They circled the twisted, scarred atomic dome. Sadako thought the doves looked like spirits of the dead flying into the freedom of the sky. When the ceremonies were over, Sadako led the others straight to the old lady who sold cotton candy. It tasted even better than last year. The day passed too quickly, as it always did. The best part, Sadako thought, was looking at all the things to buy and smelling the good food. There were stalls selling everything from bean cakes to chirping crickets. The worst part was seeing people with ugly, whitish scars. The atom bomb had burned them so badly that they no longer looked human. If any of the bomb victims came near Sadako, she was turned away quickly. Excitement grew as the sun went down. When the last dazzling display of fireworks faded from the sky, the crowd carried paper lanterns to the banks of the Ota River. Mr. Sasaki carefully lit candles inside of 6 lanterns, one for each member of the family. The lanterns carried names of relatives who had died because of the thunderbolt. Sadako had written Oba-chan's name in the side of her lantern. When the candles were burning brightly, the lanterns were launched into the Ota River. They floated out to sea like a swarm of fireflies against the dark water. That night, she thought, the spider had brought good luck. Tomorrow she would remind him about that. Chapter 3, Sadako's Secret. It was the beginning of autumn when Sadako rushed home with the good news. She kicked off her shoes and threw open the door with a bang. I'm home, she called. Her mother was fixing supper in the kitchen. The most wonderful thing has happened, Sadako said breathlessly. Guess what? The big race on field day, Sadako said. I've been chosen from the bamboo class to be on the relay team. She danced around the room, gaily swaying her school bag. Just think, if we win, I'll be sure to get on the team in junior high school next year. That was what Sadako wanted more than anything else. At supper, Mr. Sasaki made a long speech about family honor and pride. Even Masahiro was impressed. Sadako was too excited to eat. She just sat there, grinning happily. From then on, Sadako thought of only one thing, the relay race. She practiced every day at school and often ran all the way home. When Masahiro timed her with Mr. Sasaki's big watch, Sadako's speed surprised everyone. Maybe, she dreamed, I will be the best runner in the whole school. At last the big day arrived. A crowd of parents, relatives, and friends gathered at the school to watch the sports events. Sadako was so nervous she was afraid her legs wouldn't work at all. Members of the other team suddenly looked taller and stronger than her teammates. When Sadako told her mother how she felt, Mrs. Sasaki said, Sadako-chan, it is natural to be a little bit afraid, but don't worry. When you get out there, you will run as fast as you can. Then it was time for the relay race. Just do your best, Mr. Sasaki said, giving Sadako's hand a squeeze. We'll be proud of you. The kind words from her parents made the knot in Sadako's stomach loosen. They love me, no matter what, she thought. At the signal to start, Sadako fought everything but the race. When it was her turn, she ran with all the strength she had. Sadako's heart was still thumping painfully against her ribs when the race was over. It was then that she first felt strange and dizzy. She scarcely heard someone cry, "Your team won!" The bamboo class surrounded Sadako, cheering and shouting. She shook her head a few times, and the dizziness went away. All winter, Sadako tried to improve her running speed. To qualify for the racing team in junior high, she would have to practice every day. Sometimes, after a long run, the dizziness returned. Sadako decided not to tell her family about it. She tried to convince herself that it meant nothing, that the dizziness would go away. But it didn't. It got worse. Frightened, Sadako carried the secret inside of her. She didn't even tell Chizuko, her best friend. On New Year's Eve, Sadako hoped she could magically wish away the dizzy spells. How perfect everything would be if she didn't have this secret. At midnight, she was in her cozy bed quilts when the temple bells began to chime. They were ringing out all the evils of the new year so that the new one ringing out all the evils of the old year so that the new one would have a fine beginning. With each ring, Sadako drowsily made her special wish. The next morning, the Sasaki family joined crowds of people as they visited their shrines. Mrs. Sasaki looked beautiful in her best flowered silk kimono. "As soon as we can afford it, I'll buy a kimono for you," she promised Sadako. "A girl your age should have one." Sadako thanked her mother politely, but she didn't care about a kimono. She only cared about racing with the team in junior high. Amidst throngs of happy people, Sadako forgot her secret for a while. She let the bright joy of the season wash her worries away. At the end of the day, she raced Masahiro home and won easily. Above the door were the good luck symbols Mrs. Sasaki had put there to protect them during the new year. With a beginning like this, how could anything bad happen? Chapter 4. A secret no longer. For several weeks, it seemed that the prayers and good luck symbols had done their work well. Sadako saw a cold winter day in February. Sadako was running in the schoolyard. Suddenly, everything seemed to whirl around her and she sank to the ground. One of the teachers rushed over to help. I guess I'm just tired," Sadako said in a weak voice. When she tried to stand up, her legs went wobbly and she fell down again. The teacher sent Mitsui home to tell Mr. Sasaki. He left his barbershop and took Sadako to the Red Cross hospital. For those with the atom bomb disease. In a few minutes, Sadako was in an examining room where a nurse x-rayed her chest and took some of her blood. Dr. Numata tapped her back and asked a lot of questions. 3 other doctors came in to look at Sadako. One of them shook his head and gently stroked her hair. By now, the rest of Sadako's family was at the hospital. Her parents were in the doctor's office. But that's impossible! At the sound of that frightening word, Sadako put her hands over her ears. She didn't want to hear anymore. Of course, she didn't have leukemia. Why, the atom bomb hadn't even scratched her. Nurse Yasunaga took Sadako into one of the hospital rooms and gave her a kind of cotton kimono to wear. Sadako had just climbed into bed when her family came in. Mrs. Sasaki put her arms around Sadako. "You must stay here for a little while," she said, trying to sound cheerful. "But I'll come every evening. And we'll visit you after school," Masahiro promised. Mitsui and Eiji nodded. There was a troubled look in Mr. Sasaki's eyes, but he only said, "The doctors want to make some tests. That's all." He paused. Then he added, "They might keep you here for a few weeks." A few weeks! To Sadako, it sounded like years. She would miss graduation into junior high school. And even worse, she would not be part of the racing team. Sadako swallowed hard and tried not to cry. Mrs. Sasaki fussed over Sadako. She plumped the pillows and smoothed the bedspread. Mr. Sasaki cleared his throat. Is there anything you want?" he asked. Sadako shook her head. All she really wanted was to go home. But when? A cold lump of fear grew in her stomach. She had heard that many people who went into this hospital never came out. Later, Nurse Yasunaga sent the others away so that Sadako could rest. When she was alone, Sadako buried her face in the pillow and cried for a long time. She had never before felt so lonely and miserable. Chapter 5. The Golden Crane. The next morning, Sadako only the new and different sounds of the hospital. Sadako sighed. She had hoped that yesterday was just a bad dream. It was even more real when Nurse Yasunaga came in to give her a shot. Getting shots is part of being in the hospital, the plump nurse said briskly. You'll get used to it. I just want the sickness to be over with, Sadako said unhappily, so that I can go home. That afternoon, Chizuko was Sadako's first visitor. She smiled mysteriously as she held something behind her back. Shut your eyes, she said. While Sadako squinted her eyes tightly shut, Chizuko put some pieces of paper and scissors on the bed. Now you can look, she said. What is it? Sadako asked, staring at the paper. Chizuko was pleased with herself. I've figured out a way for you to get well, she said proudly. Watch. She cut a piece of gold paper into a large square. In a short time, she had folded it over and over into a beautiful crane. Sadako was puzzled. But how can that paper bird make me well? Don't you remember that old story about the crane? Chizuko asked. It's supposed to live for 1,000 years. If a sick person folds 1,000 paper cranes, the gods will grant her wish and make her healthy again. She handed a crane to Sadako. Here's your first one. Sadako's eyes filled with tears. How kind of Chizuko to bring a good luck charm, especially when her friend didn't really believe in such things. Sadako took the golden crane and made a wish. The funniest little feeling came over her when she touched the bird. It must be a good omen. Thank you, Chizuko-chan, she whispered. I'll never part with it. When she began to work with the paper, Sadako discovered that folding a crane wasn't as easy as it looked. With Chizuko's help, she learned how to do the difficult parts. After making 10 birds, Sadako lined them up on the table beside the golden crane. Some were a bit lopsided, but it was a beginning. Now I only have 990 to make. With the golden crane nearby, she felt safe and lucky. Why, in a few weeks, she would be able to finish the 1,000. Then she would be strong enough to go home. That evening, Masahiro brought Sadako's homework from school. When he saw the cranes, he said, There isn't enough room on that small table to show off your birds. I'll hang them from the ceiling for you. Sadako was smiling all over. Do you promise to hang every crane I make, she said. Masahiro promised. That's fine, Sadako said, her eyes twinkling with mischief. Then you'll hang the whole 1,000? 1,000, her brother groaned. You're joking. Sadako told him the story of the cranes. Masahiro ran a hand through his straight black hair. You tricked me, he said with a grin, but I'll do it anyhow. He borrowed some thread and tacks from Nurse Yasunaga and hung the first 10 cranes. The golden crane stayed in its place of honor on the table. After supper, Mrs. Sasaki brought Mitsui and Eiji to the hospital. Everyone was surprised to see the birds. They reminded Mrs. Sasaki of a famous old poem. Out of colored paper, cranes come flying into our house. Mitsui and Eiji liked the golden crane best, but Mrs. Sasaki chose the tiniest one made of fancy green paper with pink parasols on it. This is my choice, she said, because small ones are the most difficult to make. After visiting hours, it was lonely in the hospital room. So lonely that Sadako folded more cranes to keep up her courage. 11, I wish I'd get better. 12, I wish I'd get better. Chapter 6, Kenji. Everyone saved paper for Sadako's good luck cranes. Chizuko brought colored paper from the bamboo class. Father saved every scrap from the barber shop. Even Nurse Yasunaga gave Sadako the wrappings from packages of medicine. And Masahiro hung every one of the birds, as he had promised. Sometimes he strung many on one thread. The biggest cranes flew alone. During the next few months, there were times when Sadako felt almost well. However, Dr. Numata said it was best for her to stay in the hospital. By now, Sadako realized that she had leukemia, but she also knew that some patients recovered from the disease. She never stopped hoping that she would get well, too. On good days, Sadako was busy. She did her homework, wrote letters to friends and pen pals, and amused her visitors with games, riddles, and songs. In the evening, she always made paper cranes. Her flock grew to over 300. Now the birds were perfectly folded. Her fingers were sure and worked quickly without any mistakes. Gradually, the atom bomb disease took away Sadako's energy. She learned about pain. Sometimes, throbbing headaches stopped her from reading and writing. At other times, her bones seemed to be on fire, and more dizzy spells sent Sadako into deep blackness. Often, she was too weak to do anything but sit by the window and look longingly at the maple tree in the courtyard. She would stay there for hours, holding the golden crane in her lap. Sadako was feeling especially tired one day when Nurse Yasunaga wheeled her out onto the porch for some sunshine. There, Sadako saw Kenji for the first time. He was 9 and small for his age. Sadako stared at his thin face and shining dark eyes. Hello. Soon the two were talking like old friends. Kenji had been in the hospital for a long time, but he had a few visitors. His parents were dead, and he had been living with an aunt in a nearby town. She's so old that she comes to see me only once a week. I read most of the time. Sadako turned away at the sad look on Kenji's face. It doesn't really matter, he went on with a weary sigh, because I'll die soon. I have leukemia from the bomb. But you can't have leukemia, Sadako said quickly. You weren't even born then. That isn't important, Kenji said. The poison was in my mother's body, and I got it from her. Sadako wanted so much to comfort him, but she didn't know what to say. Then she remembered the cranes. You can make paper cranes like I do, so that a miracle can happen. I know about the cranes, Kenji replied quietly, but it's too late. Even the gods can't help me now. Just then, Nurse Yasunaga came out onto the porch. Kenji, she said sternly, how do you know such things? He gave her a sharp look. I just know, he said. And besides, I can read my blood count on the chart. Every day it gets worse. The nurse was flustered. What a talker, she said. You are tiring yourself. And she wheeled Kenji inside. Back in her room, Sadako was thoughtful. She tried to imagine what it would be like to be ill and have no family. Kenji was brave, that's all. She made a big crane out of her prettiest paper and sent it across the hall to his room. Perhaps it would bring him luck. Then she folded more birds for her flock. 398, 399. One day, Kenji didn't appear on the porch. Later that night, Sadako heard the rumble of a bed being rolled down the hall. Nurse Yasunaga came in to tell her that Kenji had died. Sadako turned to the wall and let her tears come. After a while, she felt the nurse's gentle hand on her shoulder. Let's sit by the window and talk, Nurse Yasunaga said in a kindly voice. When Sadako finally stopped sobbing, she looked out at the moonlit sky. Do you think Kenji is up there on a star island? Wherever she is, I'm sure that he is happy now, the nurse said. He is leaves on the maple tree rustle in the wind. Then she said, I'm going to die next, aren't I? Of course not, Nurse Yasunaga answered with a firm shake of her head. She spread some colored paper on Sadako's bed. Come on, and let me see you fold another paper crane before you go to sleep. After you finish 1,000 birds, you'll live to be an old, old lady. Sadako tried hard to believe that. She carefully folded cranes and made the same wish. 463, 464. Chapter 7. Hundreds of Wishes. June came with its long, endless rains. Day after day, the sky was gray as rain spattered against the windows. Rain dripped steadily from the leaves. Sadako grew pale and listless. Only her parents and Masahiro were allowed to visit her. The bamboo class sent a Kokeshi doll to cheer her up. Sadako liked the wooden doll's wistful smile and the red roses painted on its kimono. The doll stood next to the golden crane on Sadako's bedside table. Mrs. Sasaki was worried because Sadako didn't eat enough. One evening, she brought a surprise wrapped in a furoshiki bundle. It contained all of Sadako's favorite foods, an egg roll, chicken and rice, pickled plums, and bean cakes. Sadako propped herself up against the pillows and tried to eat, but it was no use. Her swollen gums hurt so much that she couldn't chew. Finally, Sadako's pushed the good things away. Her mother's eyes were bright as if she were going to cry. I'm such a turtle, Sadako burst out. She was angry with herself for making her mother sad. She also knew that the Sasaki family had no extra money for expensive food. Tears stung Sadako's eyes, and she quickly brushed them away. It's all right, Mrs. Sasaki said soothingly. She cradled Sadako in her arms. You'll be better soon. Maybe when the sun comes out again. Sadako leaned against her mother and listened to her read from a book of poems. When Masahiro came, Sadako was calmer and happier. He told her news from school and ate some of the special dinner. Before Masahiro left, he said, Oh, I almost forgot. Eiji sent you a present. He dug into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of silver paper. Here, he said, giving it to his sister. 8 cents for another crane. Sadako stiffed the paper. It smells like candy, she said. I hope the gods like chocolate. The three burst out laughing. It was the first time beginning to work. She smoothed out the paper and folded a bird. 541, but she was too tired to make more. Sadako stretched out on the bed and closed her eyes. As Mrs. Sasaki tiptoed out of the room, she whispered a poem she used to say when Sadako was little. "O flock of heavenly cranes, cover my child with your wings." Chapter 8, The Last Days. Near the end of July, it was warm and sunny. Sadako seemed to be getting better. "I'm over halfway to 1,000 cranes," she told Masahiro, "so something good is going to happen." And it did. Her appetite came back and much of the pain went away. Dr. Numato was pleased with her progress and told Sadako she could go home for a visit. That night, Sadako was so excited she couldn't sleep. To keep the magic working, she made It was a wonderful day to be home with the spirits of the dead who returned to visit those they had loved on Earth. The table. Sadako's golden crane and Kokeshi doll were there too. The air was filled with smells of delicious holiday food. Dishes of bean cakes and rice balls had been placed on the altar shelf for ghostly visitors. That night, Sadako watched her mother put a lantern outside so the spirits could find their way in the dark. She let out a happy sigh. Perhaps, just perhaps, she was home to stay. For several days, a steady stream of friends and relatives came to call on the Sasaki family. By the end of the week, Sadako was pale and tired again. She could only sit quietly and watch the others. "Sadako certainly has good manners now," Mr. Sasaki said. "Oboshen's spirit must be pleased to see how ladylike her granddaughter has become." "How can you say that?" Mrs. Sasaki cried. "I would rather have our lively Sadako back." She dabbed at her eyes and hurried into the kitchen. "I'm making everyone sad," Sadako thought. She wished she could suddenly turn into her old self. How happy her mother would be then. As if he knew what was in Sadako's mind, her father said gruffly, "There now, don't worry. After a good night's rest, you'll feel fine." But the next day, Sadako had to return to the hospital. For the first time, she was glad to be in the quiet hospital room. Her parents sat beside the bed for a long time. Every now and then, Sadako drifted into a strange kind of half-sleep. "When I die," she said dreamily, "will you put my favorite bean cakes on the altar for my spirit?" Mrs. Sasaki could not speak. She took her daughter's hand and held it tightly. "Hush," Mr. Sasaki said in a funny voice. "That will not happen for many, many years. Don't give up now, Sadako-chan. You have to make only a few hundred more cranes." Nurse Yasunaga gave Sadako a medicine that helped her rest. Before her eyes closed, Sadako reached out to touch this golden crane. "I will get better," she murmured to the Kokeshi doll, "and someday I'll race like the wind." From then on, Dr. Numata gave Sadako blood transfusions or shots almost every day. "I know it hurts," he said, "but we must keep on trying." Sadako nodded. She never complained about the shots and almost constant pain. A bigger pain was growing deep inside of her. It was the fear of dying. She had to fight it as well as the disease. The golden crane helped. It reminded Sadako that there was always hope. Mrs. Sasaki spent more and more time at the hospital. Every afternoon, Sadako listened for the familiar slap slap or for plastic slippers in the hall. All visitors had to put on yellow slippers at the door, but Mrs. Sasaki's made a special sound. Sadako's heart ached to see her mother's face so lined with worry. The leaves on the maple tree were turning rust and gold when the family came for one last visit. Eiji handed Sadako a big box wrapped in golden paper and tied with a red ribbon. Slowly, Sadako opened it. Inside was something her mother had always wanted for her, a silk kimono with cherry blossoms on it. Sadako felt hot tears blur her eyes. "Why did you do it?" she asked, touching the soft cloth. "I'll never be able to wear it, and silk costs so much money." "Sadako-chan," her father said gently, "your mother stayed up late last night to finish the sewing. Try it on for her." With a great effort, Sadako lifted herself out of bed. Mrs. Sasaki helped her put on the kimono and tie the sash. Sadako was glad her swollen legs didn't show. Unsteadily, she limped across the room and sat in her chair by the window. Everyone agreed that she was like a princess in the kimono. At time, she stared at Sadako in surprise. "You look better in that outfit than in school clothes," she said. Everyone laughed, even Sadako. "Then I'll wear it to classes every day when I'm well again," she joked. Mitsui and Eiji giggled at the idea. For a little while, it was almost like the good times they used to have at home. They played word games and sang Sadako's favorite songs. Meanwhile, she sat stiffly in the chair, trying not to show the pain it caused her. But it was worth the pain. When her parents left, they looked almost cheerful. Before she went to sleep, Sadako managed to fold only one paper crane. 644. It was the last one she ever made. Chapter 9. Racing with the Wind. As Sadako grew weaker, she thought more about death. Would she live on a heavenly mountain? Did it hurt to die? Or was it like falling asleep? If only I could forget about it, Sadako thought. But it was like trying to stop the rain from falling. As soon as she Sadako lost track of days and nights. Once, when she was awake, she saw her mother crying. Don't cry, she begged. Please don't cry. Sadako wanted to say more, but her mouth and tongue wouldn't move. A tear slid down her cheek. Sadako had brought her mother so much grief, and all she could do was wait. Her fingers were too clumsy to fold it. I can't even make a crane, she said to herself. I've turned into a real turtle. Quickly, Sadako tried with all her strength to fold the paper before she was swept into darkness. It might have been minutes or hours later that Dr. Numata came in and felt Sadako's forehead. He gently took the paper out of her hands. She barely heard him say, It's time to rest. You can make more birds tomorrow. Sadako gave a faint nod. Tomorrow seemed like such a long, long way off. The next time she awoke, the family was there. Sadako smiled at them. She was proud. She was part of that warm, loving circle that she would always be. Nothing could ever change that. Already lights were dancing behind her eyes. Life was slipping away from her, but the crane made Sadako feel stronger inside. Made the birds rustle and sway. They seemed to be alive and flying out through the open window. How beautiful and free they were. Sadako sighed and closed her eyes. She never woke up. And that's the end.
Thank you very much, Ryan. It was very moving. Next, we're going to have Ryan show us a little about folding these peace cranes that we've just learned so eloquently about. While Ryan prepares for that part of the program, I'm just going to show some pictures of Sadako and the paper crane statues around the world, mostly in Japan, but around the world as well, that adorn different parks that memorialize Sadako. Very moving story. This one is in Nagasaki, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. And you can see the paper cranes. This one is one that people really love. New Jersey Peace Action has made thousands of these over the years and given them to legislators and things like that along the way. So now I'm going to stop screen sharing in order to let Ryan's screen take over more. Thank you all, and thank you, Ryan, for doing such a great job. And I will get out of the way and let you fold your paper crane. Thanks again.
You're welcome. All right, I'm not sure if I should narrate, but I guess I'll just get to folding.
Yeah, I think a little narration might help if you can just,
right.
Do a little narration if you don't mind.
All right, so I've got some golden paper like Sadako folded with her first crane. So let's see. Folding a paper crane is a fairly easy process once you get the hang of it. It can be a little difficult in the beginning, but with a lot of practice, like many things, it becomes natural. There are really no specific books that you should look at if you want to learn origami or how to fold a paper crane. If you go to a craft store and look for origami paper, there's usually some sort of instruction on there because it's a pretty popular thing to fold. How to fold a paper crane or how to fold a dragon or whatever you want to learn. And it'll show you. And I think at the end we'll have some links for a video where you can learn how to easily fold a paper crane. So if you're interested, you can do that. So, this part here was one of the most difficult parts for me to learn when I was learning how to make a paper crane, because it's a little interesting. So people on Instagram lifting up these parts and then folding it open like that. If anyone's thinking, oh my God, it's going so fast, how do they do that? It's practice. A lot of practice. I don't even know how many of these I've folded.
Great job. I've
Thank you.
pasted some instructions. Judith, Peggy's going to talk about this in a minute as well.
Alrighty. This probably isn't my best work, but that's all right. As long as it looks slightly like a crane, you're good to go.
Could you just lower your hands just a little? There you go. Beautiful.
And then at the end, I remember the first person who taught me how to make paper crane just told me, so these two little points here could be, or the head and the tail, so you just pick the prettiest one to be the head. The other one's the tail. So there you go.
There you go.
Crane.
Beautiful. A little lower.
Yep, I'm
Really
just
cool.
showing people on Instagram.
Oh, I got you. I forgot you had that going. Good. Oh, that's wonderful. Beautiful. Thanks, Ryan. I'm gonna now introduce the president of New Jersey Peace Action Education Fund. I'm gonna bring everybody back on screen. So we'll bring Judith and Peggy. This is Peggy Monges, president of the New Jersey Peace Action Education Fund. And here's the proud grandma, Judith Arnold, president of New Jersey Peace Action. And Peggy has some words of wisdom for us today as well. I put, just so you guys know, I put in the chat window how to search for origami peace cranes. So that's there, Peggy, and you can speak. I'll be quiet.
Okay. Thank you, Ryan. That was beautiful.
Thank you.
I'm Peggy Monges, and I thank you all so much for joining us this morning. And I hope you've also been able to participate in some of the other very moving events that have been presented over the past few days. And I would like to especially remind you that longtime Peace Action supporter Charlene Leahy will be presenting a concert for peace tomorrow, Sunday, from 7:30 to 9 p.m. This is going to be a beautiful benefit for New Jersey Peace Action with lots of original peace songs. Now, let's see, to find out more about it and to attend, go to the chat window. Let's see, I don't think I have my chat window open.
It's in there though, Peggy.
It's in there, okay. And Jeff has up how to get into that concert tomorrow. So enjoy that too. If you'd like to learn more about folding origami peace cranes or any other origami possibilities, search for origami peace cranes, and there are a lot of videos there. I found Tavin's how to make a paper crane origami step-by-step, easy, very good, very, very explicit in the folds, and I was able to do it. So if you'd like to find out more about Peace Action's work to abolish nuclear weapons, please call our director, Jeff Hoey, 973-222-0368, or go to our website, NJPeaceAction.org, And thank you everyone again for being here this morning, and have a great rest of the weekend. Thank you. Bye.
Bye,
Thank you,
everyone.
Ryan.
And
Thank
thank
you,
you so
Peggy.
much. Thank you, Ryan.